Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Astrogairu and I hope you're doing well today. So in this astrological series, I'm going to be talking about houses. I'm going to be talking about houses in astrology, sort of what they mean, um, which life stage or which life area um, they sort of affect, or basically where the vibration or where the energy of these houses are most pronounced, and sort of like in what ways this manifestation of energy and vibration comes about in terms of our reality, in terms of how we experience life. Um, so so I'm going to be giving you the keys to your third house, which is the house of communication. Um, but before we get started, just want to remind you that this is a series of 12 houses. So if you find yourself um, watching this as the first time, as this being your first video that you come across, just take note that there are other houses that I talk about. Like I said, it's a 12 house series, and I think it's important. I would recommend, watching all the houses because I feel, like I said, it's like a life stage, a kind of like way of looking at it, and there's some important connections, that all of those houses have with one another. So sometimes, the third house might not resonate so much with you, maybe because you don't have any planets in the third house, or you don't have a lot of planets focused on your third house. And so maybe the energy of that house doesn't necessarily resonate with you so strongly, but you might find that, you have planets, let's say, for example, in your sixth house or your ninth house or your 12th house, which is connected to the third house. And so, of course, um, just having a lot of planets in, let's say, your ninth house, for example, would have quite an impact also on your third house because there's a connection there. And so, yeah, I definitely recommend, if there's time and if there's interest, to sort of like go through the entire series, because I think it would give a more complete story, and just a better understanding of sort of how these houses are interconnected and how the energies kind of, feed off of each other and so forth. Um, I also have other content. I've talked about elemental influences. I've talked about the qualities, in astrology. I've talked about what it means to be like a cardinal sign, what to be a fixed sign means, and also what being a mutable sign, means. Yeah, so yeah, I've talked about major aspects in astrology. Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff that I've posted on the channel. So feel free to subscribe, if you're interested in this kind of content and if you'd like to hear or see more of these. And thanks for sharing, and thanks for liking, thanks for commenting. All of those mean a lot. It helps the channel grow, and it also helps to show that there is interest, that there are this something that you find, you learn something from it, or there's something that uh, is useful to you in some way or another. And if you're into astrology, I would assume you are, if you are subscribed or if you're listening to this type of content. So if you are like somebody who is already, well vested in astrology, then let's grow together, let's share. And perhaps also this helps you to see something from a different perspective than the way that you see your, the way you process your astrology. So then in that case, we can share ideas and we can sort of grow together. And of course, you can share those in the comment section. Um, yeah. So so let's get started. Initially, I wanted to keep the series like by 10 to 15 minutes, but I found that this rant just went on for like 30 so minutes. So the first two that I've now recorded, the first and the second houses have already been like 30 minutes, 32 minutes or so long. So maybe I'll try and keep that pattern. I suppose try to limit it by about 30 minutes. So yeah, let's dive right in. So the third house is a candid house, or maybe in a more simple word, it's a mutable house. It's the house of Gemini. It's ruled by Mercury, the planet Mercury, and it has to do with communication, pretty much. That's the fundamental vibration or the fundamental energy of the houses is that of communication. It's how we communicate, basically. Um, um, our intellectual pursuits, are sort of like mental hobbies. Quality of sleep is also something that I would throw into the third house as well. Um, I apologize that I'm constantly clearing my throat. I've done quite a lot of recordings today, so my throat has, put in a lot of hours. So yeah, I apologize. I know it can be a little bit annoying. Um, yeah, so, but I digress. So the third house, like I was saying, so intellectual pursuits, mental hobbies, this is somebody who might have quite a strong interest in playing like puzzle games or even playing chess, because like chess is such a mental game. Those types of games that engages the mind. So if you find people who are into those or who gravitate towards those hobbies, you might just be dealing with somebody who has quite a lot of energy in their third house. Also intellectual pursuits and um, um, distance traveling, short distance traveling is also something that I most people would probably associate with the third house as well. Um, and also your schooling experience. Your well, the ninth house is also education, but more like higher learning education, where the third house is sort of like the foundation. So we're looking at elementary education, like primary, high school, that type of thing. Um, and it speaks to the kind of ways that you have handled or the ways that you handle your expectations as they relate to your schooling life. What kind of student are you? As a parent, and you're observing your kids, if they have like this third house, influence, you might see that the style of communication or the style of learning that the child has, and in that way, like for example, if the child is a third house active student, their ways of learning might be ways that kind of stimulate their mind more, like I was saying, like playing these puzzle games and so forth. Whereas another child you have might not have a third house activated energy, and so their style of learning might be different, or they might just not like school altogether. Period. They might maybe be more into arts, like fifth house, things of that nature. Or their way of learning is through the arts, through drawing, things things of that nature, which are more like fifth house things. So if you have a child who likes to draw, um, or paint. That's like the fifth house. So their way of learning is through arts and creativity and like abstract things that have no real rules. But third house is like, it's all about the rules. Like, chess, there's a way that you play chess, the puzzle games, there's a system to it. It's very much in the mind. It's not so abstract. Yeah. So as a parent who has a child, you might want to kind of focus on this types of different ways that that your child handles like their schooling life or their schooling experience, and how they handle all of those expectations. And yeah, third house child might like school a little bit more than a child who has no third house energy. So that's something to keep in mind. Um, also, hyperactive mind or ADHD. This was something that I also talked about in the first house when I was talking about the house of Aries, that's traditionally ruled by Mars. There's also a lot of hyperactiveness, although, of course, I would also put hyperactive mind in the first house of Aries or Mars. Either way, it works. Um, I would hesitatingly put a hyperactive mind in the first house, but I would still put it there nonetheless. Although I would put physical hyperactiveness more in the first house because Mars is the ruler and it's more about that physical exertion. Um, Mars is the warrior, So there's a lot of physical hyperactiveness. But the hyperactive mind, although I would put it in the first house, I would more specifically or more precisely, I would put it in the third house, the hyperactive mind, because this is the house of the mind, of the communication, of the conscious, our conscious thoughts and so forth. So the hyperactive mind definitely fits here more so than any other house. So if you have kids who are a little bit like hyperactive mentally, they also could indicate third house, heavily third house activated, energy the child has or that the individual has, if it's an adult individual or well teenager. However, this applies to you. So that's definitely one thing, and I'll talk about this hyperactiveness a little bit more in the manifestations of it in our reality, because it has a lot of it tells quite a lot actually. And then also one other thing has to do with like small talk, which of course is no surprise. How do you handle small talk, for example, at the office? You have those colleagues of yours who are just so good with the small talk. They just know how to start that little conversation and just, keep it going. And then you have other people who are just maybe more second house, maybe more Tory, and they don't do small talk. They just like straight to business. Everything is good, good. All right, we had our coffee break, great, back to work. But like small talk, Gemini, third house, they can do that small talk. They'll start the weather talk, and then it goes into sports, and then they just know how to work it, with conversation and conversing and things like of that nature, socializing, and so forth. They're great speakers. Um, Generally, they're always great speakers, whether it's positively aspected or whether it's negatively aspected. They're always great speakers and they always speak their mind. The only difference is that if it's positively aspected, is that their speaking skills are more like I was gonna say more beneficial, but maybe what I'm trying to say is that the the message that they put out, or whatever they talk about, if it's well aspected, then they speak in a more inspiring, more positive way. Let's say somebody who has Cancer energy in the third house, might be someone who communicates with empathy. So before they say something, they're likely to kind of feel the energy and the vibe, and they might maybe withhold saying certain things if they feel or they sense that saying that is going to hurt your feeling, or if they sense that or feel that you might not be ready to hear the absolute truth, and they might withhold that and maybe just word it differently, or say it differently in a way that's maybe not so threatening or that's not so like emotionally hurtful, you know? So like a Cancer energy speaker in the third house, someone who has Cancer in the third house, um, would be that kind of speaker. And then somebody who's like a Virgo, um, might not be like a good speakers. Usually, I feel Virgos are not the best of speakers, to be honest. I could be so wrong with this, but I feel like maybe Virgos are not the best speakers. But and one of the reasons why that may be so is also because they're very detail-oriented people. Um, so is Libra, but I think more so Virgo. And the difference between the two is that even though Libra might be a little bit like, well, of course Libra is also detail oriented, but I think because Libra is an air sign, communication anyways comes a little bit more easier for them. Although of course Libra is more, maybe a little bit more on the shy side. I think Gemini is definitely a much the superior communicator of all the signs. So Libras, of course, compared to Virgos, might be a better communicator. Um, but because Virgo is an earth sign, like the earth energy already is so heavy, like it's already such a very grounded energy to start with. And so you put Virgo in there, so it's like, they just don't say anything. Virgos just don't say anything. They have to. Part of that is also because of the fear that they don't want to get it wrong. Like because they're so detail oriented. Like they want to double check the facts. They want to make sure that like all the facts are right. That there are no loopholes in what they're saying, and and if they're not so sure that what they're going to say is fact checked, double checked, triple checked, and all of that, they're not going to say it. So they'll just rather not say anything at all. And sometimes by the time that they are doing this mental gymnastics where they're trying to figure out, are there any loopholes in what I'm about to say? Um, should I double check this before I say it? By the time that they have come to the decision to say something, the conversation would have already moved onto a different, topic. And then now they're trying to keep up with a new topic again, doing this inward battle in the mind that like should they not. So that's like a Virgo speaker, maybe not like the best of speakers, at least in my studies, but other people maybe might have other astrologers might have a different perspective or a different take on that. So I gave the example of Cancer and Virgo, and then Taurus is also an earth sign, but I think Taurus might be just a tad bit better than like Virgo. Actually, I think Barack Obama probably has Taurus. I think I read somewhere that they have like Taurus in the third house, and that actually makes a great speaker. Um, kind of like Gemini, although Gemini is an excellent speaker. If you have Gemini in the third house, obviously you would be an amazing speaker. You just have this mental agility already as a Gemini, so you can bounce from one topic to another with just like snap of a finger. Like it's just you can just hop from one topic to another as if I don't know, just so with so much ease. That's not the case with Taurus. Although with Taurus, because it's like, because like I was talking about how Taurus is about security and safety and feeling safe and so Taurus wants to make sure, kind of like Virgo, Taurus also wants to make sure that what they're talking about is well checked and everything, but not with the same obsession like a Virgo. And once they've kind of done their stuff and now they have to talk, they're very eloquent, they take their time. I think Barack Obama is a perfect example of someone who has Taurus in the third house in terms of speaking skills. They're very slow and very um, deliberate. That's the word I was looking for. Very deliberate with the pronunciation, what they're saying, how it's coming across, how it resonates with the audience, how it makes the audience feel, and how it makes him feel, how it connects to all the senses. Is it believable? Is it that's like a Taurian kind of way of speaking, and I think it does pretty well here if you have a Taurian energy in your third house in terms of speaking skills. Um, the planet Mars, I feel, doesn't do so well here when it comes to speaking. If you have like Mars, if you have Mars, for example, embodying the sign of Cancer, it might take away some of that Cancerian empathy or that Cancerian sensitivity when it comes to talking. That if this person is not in a good mood, for example, if they're not vibrating very well, the Mars might cause them to say things very bluntly or very insensitively that hurt the feelings of other people. Or just even if you just have Aries here, if you have Mars in Aries, personally, I feel that this might maybe not be the best placement to have Mars. I don't know, other astrologers can comment, but I feel like if you have Mars and Aries in the third house, specifically when it comes to speaking, I think these can be some of the most blunt people. They just say whatever comes to mind because Mars is already so impulsive and so careless and so risk taking and so freedom loving and so free that they just say whatever comes to mind without any repercussions, and then they're like, oh shit, that might have actually like hurt, that might have actually been like really insensitive. Oh well, whatever. Then they move on and then they do the same shit again. So that's like what Mars Aries energy can do to a third house native in terms of like speaking skills. Um, but on the overall, it is the house of communication. So that's where you want to look at somebody's communication styles, what planets are there, and what energy does that planet embody? Is it the energy of a Virgo, Cancer, Gemini, or Taurus, and so then that also influences the style and the way and the tone, and so forth in terms of how they engage in the small talk and how their speaking skills kind of manifests, or come about. But talking about Mars, though, in the third house, maybe the one other Mars Aryan energy, the one positive thing that I could maybe ascribe to having Mars here might maybe not be the speaking skills, but like when it comes to sports, I think most people probably don't put sports in the third house. I think they would put that under the fifth house as hobbies. But I like to also throw in sports in the third house personally. You might have some of your best athletes, like sprinters and runners, tend to have some Mars, like in the third house, or even like some swimmers also tend to have Mars energy in the third house. And that's usually never surprising to me to have some swimmers who have like their Mars in the third house, the planet Mars, because anyways, the third house, as it relates to the body and health, rules shoulders, arms, and hands and fingers. So it wouldn't be so surprising to have somebody who's a swimmer, have their Mars in the third house, but they might probably not be the best speaker. Sorry. Like, of course, they will always speak their mind, but they will probably be so blunt. And depending what type of person you are, you might adore it and like it, or you might find that the way they communicate is always offensive and insulting. But then again, it also depends what energy that Mars embodies in terms of the speaking skills. But of course, this is not just about speaking, it's also about other forms of communication, like, it could also be your writing skills, how you write. Some people are just maybe better writers than they are speakers. Again, I think here maybe Virgo energy here might do better as a writer, maybe than it is as a speaker, you know. Um, yeah, what else comes to mind? Um, and also, this is the house of like electrical appliances. Since we're onto communications, or you're looking at your devices like your phone, that has to do with communication, or even just like other electrical appliances, also are connected to the third house. And if it's not so well aspected, if it's poorly aspected or negatively aspected, you would find that sometimes you get electrically um, I forgot the word I was looking for. I just had it in my mind. Now it's gone. Like when you touch maybe you're putting in, your plug, you're plugging your device into the electrical socket, and then you get hit, you get electrically, you get hit by the electricity. Let's say you put your finger and then, the electricity, hits you. I forgot the word for it. I just had it in my mind now. Electrocuted, I guess. You get electrically, electrocuted. Um, so it's possible to tend to have like, some of those small accidents. With all the houses, I was talking about how accidents can happen to certain body parts that are ruled by that house. And so, because, the third house rules the arms and the hands and the fingers, and isn't it interesting because the hands and the fingers is also how we connect to our electrical appliances. That's how you plug in your device, that's how you plug in that coffee maker, or that's how you plug in your water boiler, or how you switch on the stove. You have to use your fingers, you have to use your hand, you have to rotate your arm, So when you have poorly aspected planets or negative planets in your third house, you would find that you'll always have little small accidents that has to do with injuries to the arms, to the hands, and to the fingers, where you always electrocuted when you're plugging in something and you feel this heat of electricity running through your fingers, and you're like, ouch, that was painful. Or you're switching on the stove and you forgot to switch it off, and later on you put your hand on it and then you burn your finger, or you cut your finger with a knife while you're slicing onions, or this type of small things. Some people have been cooks for years maybe and have never had an incident where they slashed part of their finger away. But then you have some people who are just consistently always cutting a piece of their finger, or injuring some part of their hand, or breaking a finger, or scarring skin around the hands, around the arms, around the fingers, or shoulders. So, these types of accidents can happen when there is like, negatively aspected planets, that affects those. And so that's how it pertains to electrical appliances. And also, when we're having transits, when the planets are going through transits and retrogrades, we also find that our appliances are acting up. Um, was it a couple of months we had like a Mercury retrograde transit that was going on, and I wouldn't have been surprised if people were telling me that their phones were just acting up or glitching, or suddenly the coffee maker is just acting up, or it's just not working, and then the next day everything is fine again. These are like things that are ruled by the third house. So whenever that energy is in retrograde, or like there's a transit going on, these types of things happen. That's also where you can tend to injure yourself as it pertains to the body parts of that house. So like I was saying, the hands, the fingers, the arms, and so forth, or shoulders. But on a more positive side, these people tend to have well-defined arms, and really broad shoulders, kind of like swimmers' shoulders. They have a really nice defined upper body, particularly the shoulders, and they tend to have really beautiful hands. It's a thing. Remember, in the second house, I was talking about the neck and the throat. So here, the arms and the hands are like a thing, and you would find that these people tend to have really beautiful hands, and they just draw you in. How many times have you heard people say to some other people, maybe even to you, if you this might be you, where people say your hands are just so beautiful, and sometimes people even get approached by modeling agencies just so that they can use their hands to model rings, or to model nail polish, or to model hand creams, or whatever, because there's just something about their hands that's just beautiful. Um, Beautiful fingers that are just, well aligned, and just good skin on the hands, and these are things that are very third house ruled. And if you have a good energy, or good planets aspecting each other there, then these positive traits sort of manifest. And also strong hands. Some people have really clumsy hands when it comes to maybe operating certain things, but these people have really strong hands. Um, yeah, it's just in terms of handling things, or just like the hands look strong just looking at them, or observing them. And this might also be with women also. They might have like really strong hands in some cases, or you might find women who have beautiful hands, or men who have also hands that are maybe a little bit more feminine, like in a beautiful sense, kind of. So it goes either way. It's like, it's not gender specific, it's just genes, like it's just genetics. um yeah. um and also, one other thing that's maybe also not talked about much is that this is also the house of siblings, like your brothers and your sisters, and so forth. So if you have well aspected, like if you have Jupiter, for example, or the energy of Sagittarius in your third house, you might have a good relationship with your brothers and sisters. But there are also cases where, if you have not a very good planet, then your relationship with your siblings might not be the best. Like if you have Neptune, for example, in the third house, your relationship with your siblings might not be the best, or you might have siblings that you're not even aware of. Because remember, Neptune always casts a fog over the house that it's in, so that certain things are not as transparent or as clear as they should be. And so when you have Neptune there, it might hinder your communication skills. It might hinder your ability to speak in some way or another, like, blurts. So this is where you might have like some speaking disorders if you have negatively aspected planets. So like Neptune here, so like dissolutions, like, thought patterns, or just like slurred speech, like slurred speech or speaking could also be an indicator of someone who has third house energy that's not negative, that's not positively aspected. So you might also want to look into that when looking into the birth chart of your client or of whoever you're looking into. Um, yeah, so that's the siblings. I talked about the sports. Um, and also one reason why I talked a strong connection with the sports, throwing in sports here, although maybe many astrologers might not put sports here. Why I put sports here is also because of it's kind of also important for therapy when it comes to now we're moving to the part of the conversation where I'm going to talk about the manifestation of these things in terms of reality. So how this manifests is that um, these people have a difficult time dealing with feelings, um, because feelings are things that we feel in our body. If we're having an ache somewhere, there's a pressure sensation somewhere that's causing a blockage, and then we feel a tension, in our shoulders. It's very common for these people to feel tension in their shoulders, and so the shoulders can hurt or feel tense and heavy. And so they don't like to deal with feelings, so they like to stay in the mind space quite a lot, you know. Um, why? Because it's a Gemini house. It's communication. It's the third house. So it's everything to do with the mental space. So if something doesn't feel all right in the body, they want to run to the mental space, or they want to continue staying in the mental space because that's where they function. But if there's a lot of stress going on, then of course that's also detrimental for the mind. So why sports is important, in my opinion, is that it draws them out of them, it gets them out of the headspace and into the body. And that way they're able to feel more, or they're able to at least release that toxic mental energy or hyperactive mental energy, and they're able to um, channel it through sports. And that helps them connect the mind and the body, so to speak. So this is why Mars in the third house can be particularly benefit. Although Mars is probably not the best planet to have in the third house, this is one positive aspect where Mars. This is at least one positive thing that at least Mars has for a third house native, is that it gives them this abundance of rush, or this quick energy that they can then transmute it, or mm, yeah, convert it into the body through sports. And that's why I talked about swimmers, or even just anybody, any kind of sport that just gets them from the mind, into the body. Um, yeah. Yeah, psychologically, that it can be an this house can also indicate irritability, excessive worry, excessive stress, negative self-talk, or just like bad thought patterns, um, insomnia, disturbed sleep, just overall quality of sleep. You also want to look into the third house to see how those things kind of come about, or play out. But I guess on a more positive, I guess these people are more receptive to therapy, progressive therapy, especially therapy that helps them, like self-hypnosis and meditation, things that can help to slow down the mind a little bit, to quiet the mind a little bit, because really this house is really mental. It's almost pretty much about the mind. And so you always want to check where is the state of mind, and how can you bring that mind a little bit into the body, so that it's not so heavy on the mind itself, you know. Um, yeah, and of course, if there is something that's not functioning well in this third house, if it's poorly aspected, it then of course will affect the houses that are connected to it, and the houses that are connected to it are the sixth house, which is the house of well, health. It's the house of daily routines. Um, essentially it's the house of Virgo, so like daily routines, service to others, That's the sixth house. So you can also see that, like, if their communication is not on point, they might not be of service to others. Do you see that connection there? So if they are blunt communicators, or if they are insensitive communicators, then they cannot be of service to other people. Um, because they just hurt other people with the things that they say, or the things that they do, but most of the things that they say, or how they communicate, or how they write, because this is the house of service. The sixth house is the house of service. So you have to be in a positive state of mind, positive way of communicating, or effective way of communicating in order to be able to be of better service, to others. And these people want to be of service to others, because, what's the point of communication if it's not for, the greater good of other people? What's the point of, discovering information or insight and not sharing it with the masses? So, of course, third house people and their communication abilities want to be of service to other people through communication, through writing, through speech, through poetry. That's another thing, also through poetry, spoken word. Um, so there's a strong connection actually between the third house and the sixth house of service to other people. And so there's a strong, you want to look into this house to see what's happening in the person's sixth house. If their sixth house, if something in the sixth house is not clicking or it's not working well, come back and see what's in the third house. And also, you want to look at the ninth house. It's another mutable house that's connected to the third house, and that's the house of travel. That's the house of um, further education. So remember earlier I was talking about, elementary education with the third house. How did the child handle the expectations related to their schooling life? Did they successfully handle that expectation? Then that becomes an indicator that they can, progress to higher education, ninth house. But then also, if the child did not handle those expectations of elementary schooling life very well, then that also indicates and also shows that that child maybe will have a harder time um, transitioning to higher learning, tertiary education, and then you might want to figure out different ways or different methods, to get the child to that level. I was talking about how one child maybe is a painter or is more artistic, or, um, more this kind of like abstract ways of doing things. And so maybe they might have quite a different path to the ninth house, as opposed to a child who is, I guess, in the traditional sense, more, let's say, like intelligent in a sort of like a traditional sense, in terms of like, like this child is good with math, and their mental hobbies and their intellectual thinking abilities are like, in the I like to say traditional sense, because I mean, like, it's 2019 now. I mean, like, it's, different people have different skills and different ways of doing things. But I mean, we've always valued this sort of like intel. Is it like right brain, like right brain, left brain? I should check those. I should know this actually by heart, but like, you know what I mean. So so yeah, these are indicators to see also what path the child is gonna, how the child is gonna transition into their ninth house of, further education and so forth. And also the ninth house is the house of other people, like foreigners, foreign culture, foreign long distance traveling. So if the child felt safe and secure in learning about other cultures and other people, and their sense of, travel, like if you gave the child enough freedom to travel, because the third house is short distance travel. So if you brought your child up in a way that gave them the independence to manage this sort of day-to-day short distance traveling, like, if your child was 11 or 12 and you bought them like a bus ticket, or like a, one of like this seasonal tickets, and you give them the freedom to go to school and find their way back home, you know um not only do they learn how the transport system works and how to get their way around town, um, but it also gives them the freedom to believe that they can embark on like longer distance traveling as they get older and transition into the ninth house of long distance traveling because they are familiar with the transport system. They're familiar with finding their way around places. But if you have a parent maybe who's overly protective of the child and doesn't allow the child to sort of have mastery over this short distance traveling, it might maybe become difficult for the child as an adult to travel. Like, for example, if you have a parent who always picks up the child from school at a certain time, drives the child straight home after school, you know, um, all the time, the child just gets picked up, like, by the parent, goes home, or gets dropped off at, sports club or whatever, and then gets picked up at a certain time and then gets driven home. This child obviously, um, if you're going to pick up the child and the child just sits in the back seat, of mom and dad's, car, they're not even paying attention sometimes because they're busy on the phone. They're not even paying attention how the parent is driving on the way home. They don't have to focus on that because they're in the safety of their parents' car. So the ability to get mastery over like this short distance traveling gets hindered, a little bit. But of course, it's understandable also because, as a parent, you want your child to be safe, to feel safe. And so, but, you have to kind of find that balance where do you protect them and also where do you give them the freedom. And the child who has to take the train or take the tram or take the metro or take the bus by themselves um, has to be more aware of their environment because the parent is not there. They have to be aware of every stop the bus makes, every stop the tram makes, every stop the metro makes. Because if they are not aware, they will get off at the wrong stop and not find their way home, right? And so if they've gotten mastery over this small, short distance traveling, when they transition to the ninth house as adults, traveling elsewhere becomes easier, becomes even an adventure. So it's easier for them to go on a trip to another part of the world because they know how to find their way back. They got training for that. So in a nutshell, that's kind of like what I mean. These are the things that you sort of want to look for in the third house. What are the planets and what are the energies that are sort of like vibrating there? And those are the connections between the different houses. Of course, this is about the third house, but I'm just giving examples how it connects to the sixth house of service to others and also how it transitions to the ninth house of further education, tertiary education, foreign cultures and traveling, and in the 12th house. Maybe I don't see a very strong 12th house connection, but maybe one positive example that I could see from a third house, 12th house connection is that of knowledge, because I mean the 12th house is also the house of other people, but it's like the collective unconscious. Like spirituality, philosophy, things of that nature. Maybe philosophy is more ninth house, but what I mean to say is that it's like it's the last house, so it's the house of um it's very ethereal kinda. So if you have spent, I think the ninth house and the 12th house maybe has a stronger connection than third and 12th. But if you've had a good communication foundation, it's easier to handle 12th house things. If you've had a good third and ninth house especially, it's easier to even handle the 12th house because like the 12th house is ideas of transitioning of death, like spiritual death, like literally like becoming one now with the universe, with the creator, because that's the last house before you reincarnate again into the first house. So through education, through learning, through the child's intellectual pursuits, through your own pursuits, you would have learned a thing or two about maybe spirituality, about death, about God, however you would like to define it, religion, spirituality, however you would like to define it or understand it. And so when it comes time to transition into the 12th house, it's a little bit easier for you to do that. Whereas somebody who maybe didn't pursue those things those intellectual pursuits or that understanding, transitioning into the 12th house then maybe becomes a little bit difficult, and they have a fear of death. Um, then they start to question their faith, or things of that nature. But hey, I could go on and on and on. I could go on and on and on with this, but I don't want to take too much time. This has gone even longer than the previous recordings I've made on the house series. It's now 45 minutes. Um, so yeah, so I'm gonna end this third house here. I hope you enjoyed, this listen, this recording. Um, and I hope you picked up something new, a new perspective. I hope you learned something. I hope it was at least fun or entertaining in some way, or you could take whatever resonated for you, whatever made sense for you. But pretty much that's the third house. I'm just gonna sum it up really briefly. This third house has to do with communication. It also has to do with our siblings. It has to do with intellectual pursuits, mental hobbies, and so forth. And also, it tells a lot about the quality of our sleep. It has rulership over the hands, the shoulders, the fingers, and the arms. It also rules electrical appliances. So if you find yourself always electrocuting yourself, you might want to check what's in your third house. Also rules the conscious mind, our speaking skills, schooling experience, specifically elementary education. Also, you might want to look into this house if you have a child who has a case of ADHD, like a hyperactive mind specifically. Um, yeah, short distance travel also is placed in this third house. Maybe a lot of astrologers don't always put sports in the third house, but I like to throw in sports in there. Also because I see it as one way to get this third house heavy natives out of the mind and into the body is through channeling that mental energy, some of that mental energy into a physical activity. And if they particularly have Mars in the third house, that tends to work in their favor because Mars gives quite a lot of energy wherever it goes. And so if they can channel some of that restless, nervous, stressful, negative mental energy into some sort of sports, swimming particularly could be good. Um, um, because of their natural disposition to have good arms and hands and shoulders. But nonetheless, sports is still good because it gets them from that mind state a little bit into the body where they can feel things and feel the emotions and feel or vent out the frustrations or the anxiety through an outlet, through sports. Yeah, so that's pretty much the third house in the nutshell. Um, and yeah, so now I've successfully given you keys to your third house, and in the next series, I'm going to be giving you keys to your fourth house, the house of family, and also the house of childhood, also the house of early childhood, but in a different sense. Um, so yeah, in a different sense as opposed to the second house, for example. But yeah, the house of the mother, the house of childhood, so that's the fourth house, and I'll be giving you the keys to that house in the next recording. I'd like to take just a brief moment to say thank you for sticking around, thank you for listening, thank you for liking, subscribing, and commenting and sharing. Please leave comments in the section below. Do you have any planets in your third house? Is your third house totally empty? Are those planets well aspected? Do you know anything about them? Would you like me to break down some of the planets that you guys have in the third house? Yeah, please feel free to just share. If you're an astrologer, did you get a new perspective from this? Was there something that maybe you could add that could also enlighten, other viewers and, listeners? Um, yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you once again, and I will see you in the next one. So, ciao.